Hello, and welcome to the Guns on Pegs podcast with me, George Brown.
And me, Chris Horn.
Chris, how you doing?
I'm very good, George. This is about the third or fourth time in a row we've recorded on a slight hangover.
Well, I'm glad that yours is only slight, because mine was pretty severe this morning.
George, you see, I drink like 1.5 litres of water when I get on that train when back from London, and I'm always fine in the morning.
Yeah, I didn't feel brilliant this morning, but I'm feeling much better now, not least because the sun's shining, which is nice. But have you been doing anything? Well, let's say why we were hungover, shall we?
Yeah, so we had an awesome event last night. Our good friend Tarquin Willington Drake was releasing his new book, which is absolutely epic. He spent 500 hours in a hide, basically living with greys, which is what the title of the book is called. And so grey partridges this is. And 500 hours of doing anything like that is quite something. He's got some experiences. He knows how these birds work. And for anyone who's keen on conservation and generally, well, most people that listen to this pod, it's well worth a look.
Very nice book.
Awesome. So we had 2 evenings. Guns on Pegs were a sponsor of the event, and 2 evenings, loads of great fun people there, just really good fun time. So
yeah, it was lovely.
Enjoyable.
And he's 500 hours over 5 years. It took him to put the book together. The level of dedication and
mad,
mild insanity. Yeah.
It now explains when I get these sort of like 5 a.m. whispering voice notes from Tarquin, like it's it's all slightly seedy. It now all makes sense.
Yes. I get those as well.
So go and check out Living with Greys. It's a cracking Christmas present for someone that loves the countryside.
Yeah, for sure. Have you been out and about at all? I was shooting clays. I had my shotgun out for the first time since the end of the season.
I haven't yet.
This time last week, and it was with the World Pheasant Association.
Which do...
Yeah, they're all about conserving the various different wild pheasant breeds that exist. So, all the kind of mad, Lady Amherst and all of those, but also all the, ones that I had certainly never heard of. And they actually gave me a really cool little A4 poster with all the little, with all the different species on it. There's so many.
So does this mean you've identified what's turning up at your back door to say hello?
No, obviously the first thing I did was to get the poster out and try and match it up and see but basically, to fill everybody in, if you've not seen the Guns on Pegs Instagram, a cock pheasant has been turning up outside my kitchen window every day. He was here this morning. He's here at night time. And he's the weirdest looking pheasant I've ever seen. He's got absolutely enormous red wattles, which somebody last night was telling me they reckon are a deformity. It's not a breed thing. They reckon he's actually a bit of a sort of mutant. But he's decided that my garden is his territory. And I don't think it's going to help him that much because there's no hen pheasants around whatsoever. So it might be like last year's cock pheasant who sort of adopted us, he's got a bit confused and is in love with my chickens, which I think is quite a strong possibility.
No doubt we'll hear some updates as how he gets on.
Yeah. Yeah, but it was a really fun clay day. I shot very badly, but it's a great organisation, the World Pheasant Association, and I highly recommend checking them out. I became a member. It's only 20 quid for the year, so I strongly recommend everybody goes and joins.
Well, it's nice to hear there was no change in your shooting there. That's good.
Yes, thank you very much. Right, enough of that. Tell us who our guest is, Chris.
Our guest today is a film director, a cinematographer, and a TV producer. He's had shows on Discovery Channel, PBS, NBC Sports. But most importantly for this pod, he is, at his heart, a conservationist. He's a former president of the Professional Outdoor Media Association. He is on the board of Shepherds of Wildlife, which is a charity, and is the filmmaker and presenter of the new, much talked about film about the changing rural landscape in Scotland, The Last Keeper, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard about in the recent weeks. So please put down your clapperboard, set down the popcorn, and give a big warm welcome to Tom Opre.
Hey, thank you very much, guys. It's a great pleasure to be here. And here, let me take a little bow here. I don't see a red carpet anywhere. What's up? I've been over in Scotland and down in London, and I've seen lots of red carpets everywhere. It's been a pleasure to be in your country. First of all, thanks, guys, for having me on. It's great to talk to like-minded folks that love the outdoors as much as I do.
Absolutely, we're gonna get onto that in a bit, and I'm absolutely gutted. I couldn't make, and I only knew about it the last minute. The premiere in London of The Last Keeper. It was on Monday, the something early May,
29th. Yeah,
end
29th.
of April.
Yeah, end of April.
And you had an awesome turnout, didn't you?
Yeah, we've let's see, the first 6 screenings, Edinburgh, and the 27th was the world premiere. 29th, we're in London for the London premiere, and then we've had a handful of other screenings throughout Scotland, and all of them have been sold out, and in some cases weeks in advance. So it's been the interest has been incredible.
Amazing. So hold on, winding back though, because this is the important thing about this pod. We love our shooting. We're conservationists. We just love the outdoors. We love the countryside, focusing on the British countryside. But you've got a real love for the British countryside, clearly, and for sort of hunting, shooting. How did all this come about?
Well, that's a great question, I happen to grow up in a family here in the States in the Midwest, which is a great opportunity where I was in Michigan to go hunting and fishing. And my dad wrote for a newspaper about the outdoors, and he also was a columnist for Outdoor Life and Field and Stream, which were at one time 2 of the 3 big outdoor magazines in the United States, with millions of folks that would read them every month. And so I kind of grew up in this environment where we got to go do a lot of hunting and fishing. A little bit different than in the UK. I don't see quite the amount of driven birds, but just a ton of variety of opportunities. And growing up with a journalist for a father, back in those days, they don't make a lot of money. So the reality is I'm not a small human being, and I got a younger brother who's almost as big as me. And so we filled the larder up with venison and, pheasants and ducks and geese and salmon. We were real blessed to have some great opportunities. And so wild game has been a staple of our diets from day one. And it's something that's important, I think, to all of us. And so, and with that, he kind of ushered in this conservation ethos about the importance of the land and taking care of it and making sure that we have all these incredible creatures to be able to have in perpetuity, for future generations. And so, it's the old man used to tell me the very first environmentalist on the planet was the hunter. And so I've had just been super blessed through different things I've done over the years to have access to go and see different parts of the world, to be able to go hunting and fishing. And I've obviously been over to Europe to do some hunting, and really enjoyed the opportunities to spend time with folks out in the field. Just the traditions that they're so important to the activities around shooting and hunting in Europe and the United Kingdom are really special. And we don't quite have that. We haven't refined it as well as you guys have, but we do have a lot of those same things. The time that we spend afield is really important to a lot of families here in the United States, and it's really nice to see how well it's been refined in your country, and just it's fun being out there. Everything from the meals to what's the expectations, how things work, Levinses, all the way down the line.
Yeah, and so that's so cool, Tom. And what was your first experience of shooting and hunting in the UK?
Well, as a filmmaker in this project, The Last Keeper, the story is obviously about keepers and their relationship with the land and the wildlife and how that, that job and the things that they do provide for what's important to them. And so, our goal there was to kind of showcase really what the realities are on the ground for these people. And it's not just say the grouse moor. We worked with a landowner up that owns Edenglassy and Honorable Charles Pearson out there in Strathdon with his keeper, Alex Jenkins. And so we spent some time there on a grouse shoot, a driven grouse shoot. And then we also were trying to showcase, more of also what are some of the other issues and things that keepers do in Scotland. So we also got into the stalking and dealing with deer management. We tried to get into the fishing thing, but I have to tell you, the salmon fishing up there it's done, and that's another whole story into itself. But you really could dive into all these things and make really detailed films about it. But our goal was to kind of give more of a 10,000 foot overview of what's going on when it comes to wildlife and habitat conservation on the ground in Scotland, specifically the Highlands. And so I was able to witness some shooting. I didn't have yet to do any driven shooting for grouse, but certainly found it interesting. And then I have had an opportunity to do a little bit of driven partridge shooting up at the Isle of Muck there at the Galanock Lodge, which was a real treat. It was really fascinating to see what's going on there. And then obviously we featured in our film. And the reason why it was so incredible was being able to see that economic model of a sporting estate and how that money parlays into helping people. You guys are familiar. I'm sure you guys have probably shot up there, and your viewers, many of them probably have.
I was so glad to see it. I've been there 9 years in a row, and George went there as well not too long ago. And yeah, absolutely amazing place. It absolutely perfectly epitomizes the point you were trying to make, that island.
Yeah, and for our US viewers that trying to understand maybe a little bit of the traditions of shooting in your country, we don't have a lot of that particular. We do lots of what we call walk-up shooting or rough shooting. That's the principle. That's 99% of shooting in the United States. So trying to give people an understanding of how the sporting estate with the shooting model, how that works. And you're talking about a 1,600 acre island. We know how the aristocrat system works. So the oldest son gets the goods on the island, but the laird also had a daughter, and she wanted to stay on the island and raise her family. And of course, there wasn't enough resources. So when she married Toby, he was ready made to turn the place into a shooting estate. And so they went from not really generating a ton of revenue to generating a pretty significant amount of revenue, to the point where there was no school at the beginning. Now there's a full-time school year round. They didn't have full-time electricity. They didn't have high-speed internet. And being able to keep people on the ground busy for the off tourism season and the off farming season. So from October through till almost February, 1st of February, the fisherman has his boat in the water. He's supplying fresh seafood to the guns and stuff. And as you guys know, what they do up there is just phenomenal. And it's such a unique and cool place. And we've been really lucky. I've been taking a group of guns up there last year. I'm going to take another group this year from the United States. People that are really concerned about the future of conservation, especially when it comes to our hunting and their modern conservation model, where when wildlife provides for people, we take care of it and it flourishes. If it doesn't provide for us, then we typically don't take care of it as a species. So it goes the way of the dodo bird, and we've got thousands of years of history in our human world where we've done all kinds of dastardly things, mucking things up. So really hats off to what they've done up there at the Isle of Muck and Galanock Lodge, because it's such a fascinating thing. And for me, it was very visual. So as a filmmaker, it was really easy to see how that impact of a shooting estate would have. Whereas if you went to some place, like we said, even in Strathdon or in the middle of the Highlands or anywhere else, you really can't define it as easily in the visual sense, because you have other estates and you have other businesses and other forms, other parts of the economy rolling, and that all affect everything. So it was really neat to be there and have the opportunity to showcase what Toby and the rest of those folks are doing, and just an incredible story.
It was so good to see Sandy on there as well, because he's the fisherman, supplies the lobster and all that sort of stuff, all the different meals that they put up in the lodge, and the guy talking about the electricity. The first year I went up there, the electricity went off at 11:30 at night, and obviously there's no light pollution, so in the middle of the night there is nothing, there's no sort of residual light out the window really. if there's cloud cover, it's just completely pitch black, and you're sort of bumping your way through to the loo. Because if your phone's run out of battery, you're screwed. There's nothing you can do about it. It's hilarious, but it was exactly that type. And then to see where it is now, absolutely, it's because of what they've done there in regard to the sort of sporting side of it all.
Yeah, no, and Sandy. Luckily, we were there before and after. I don't know if you heard Sandy's boat ran aground after a major storm came in from, I guess, would have been the east and blew into the harbor, and his boat, the mooring line broke, and when I went there back in September, the stern was awash up on the bank there, so it was kind of a disappointing deal. But yeah, it's really cool to kind of see how that all works, and just seeing all the kids. I mean, there was only a couple families living on there, and consistently over the last 100 years, and now I think there was close to 60 people living on the island full time, and so and that's all because of the sporting estate.
Mm. And many years ago, the school was on BBC News because it was being threatened of being closed because it had 3 children in it, and the island, I think at the time, had 32, and so to go to 60 now, I mean that's because of all this.
Yeah,
so,
100%.
Cool. Just one thing that you said earlier that's reminded me of something that came up last night, George. The Tarquin Millington Drake, when he was announcing his book, he used a particular line from The Circle of Life, the song from The Lion King, and in that, Elton John sings, "You should never take more than you give." And he used that as the bit on his sort of Instagram post of that particular line. And I loved it because I hadn't heard that particular line in there, despite hearing that song however many times. So I think I just encourage others, use that little bit of The Circle of Life when you're putting it over some of your conservation type posts on Instagram. It's a good one.
Yeah. Very good. Right. I think it's about time so Tom, you're in the States at the moment. I'm guessing it's pretty early in the morning, but nevertheless, I'm going to ask you, what's that you're drinking?
I'm having a double shot of espresso right now because it is early. And yesterday morning, it started at 3 a.m. because I was out on the Rocky Mountain front chasing after grizzly bears and elk. That was the assignment for the day, to get on camera. So, and it ended up being a beautiful morning, and coffee was well in need. And this morning, today I needed to kind of catch up in my sleep a little bit, but coffee is an important part of our life every morning here.
And where in the States are you?
So we're in Montana. So we live in the Flathead Valley, just outside of Whitefish, Montana. We're about 20 minutes to Glacier National Park, one of the most beautiful national parks in the United States. And then we're about 60 miles from the Canadian border of British Columbia. So guys, we're not very far from the Commonwealth. So you could almost say that I'm, pseudo in the Commonwealth.
That's great. And so how far did you have to travel to find the bear and the elk? Was that is it an early morning start just to get out there early enough to find them?
Actually,
if I drive ahead of you.
Yeah, it's a couple hour drive to get over the front. We're working on a new film called The Real Yellowstone. I don't know if you guys have caught up on any of Kevin Costner's Taylor Sheridan series called The Yellowstone. And we unfortunately, the fact that most wildlife, like we said, lives on farms, fertile farms and ranches. Wildlife, it's important that the people that live with it see some sort of benefit. And so we're doing a film about these multi-generational ranching families and their relationship with the land and the wildlife, and whether the next generation can stay on the land. So, it's not quite as long as the generations you guys have in the United Kingdom and that transfer of family lands and so forth. But, it's similar in many ways, just not as many generations. And having that continuity for the conservation of the land, the management of the land is really important. And if you break up the land, well, that makes it even more difficult to manage the land, we've come to find over the years. And, a lot of the things that we're dealing with here are very similar, maybe echo some of the things in Scotland, right? Land reform, land ownership, So it's fascinating stuff. But it's just to answer your question, though, it took a couple hours to get over there because we have a couple of ranches that we're featuring in this next film that are dealing with predation of grizzly bears on their calves. Which, if you're to rewild Scotland and bringing, bears, brown bears, European brown bears and wolves with 8 million sheep on the landscape, I can make the recipe for you, but you guys can imagine what's going to be the outcome. But we deal with it every day over here. But also, as far as, elk and grizzly bears go, I have them in my backyard from time to time, right here in the Flathead Valley. We've got a few trail cams up because we've got a fair number of deer and whatnot running around our place. And so we kind of keep track of what's going on. And just every once in a while, I get a big old grizzly bear showing up on there, which Yeah, it certainly gets your attention because grizzly bears are protected by the Endangered Species Act here in the United States. And so we don't have a management system for them that involves the use of them, say hunting, like we do with almost all the other big game animals and small game that we have here in the United States. So it creates a scenario where the bears are not quite, they kind of think they're the king of the jungle, getting back to some of the stuff we were just talking about. And the reality there on the ground is that they don't have a lot of respect for humans because they don't really fear us at all because we haven't had any hunting seasons for grizzly bears since the 1970s.
So what's your tactic for a grizzly bear in the backyard first thing in the morning?
Well, I mean, you have to be very careful of what you're doing. It doesn't happen all the time, but it's once or twice a year. But when you do know you have a grizzly in there, you really have to be careful. And when you do your outdoor recreation, your hiking or even fishing and stuff, most people carry what we call pepper bear spray. Right. And that's it's a pretty potent. It's way beyond what you'd see for, say, mace for people to use for personal protection. It's a pretty large can that'll shoot 30, 40 feet out there under really high pressure. And it's got a Caspian spray that it's got this Caspian in it that basically is like so potent that, if you and I got it into your eyes, you could be in the hospital. I mean, it's pretty serious stuff. But for a grizzly bear, it has a tendency to just say, oh, okay, well, I don't really like this, and I'll walk off away from it. So, and we have some real serious issues here with human wildlife conflict when it comes to grizzly bears, because we've got more and more people moving to Montana because of films like Yellowstone, the television series. And so there's a lot of folks that seem to think that Montana is the Wild West, and we're still cattle raiding and fighting Indians. And it's not quite really what the reality is on the ground. But we got a lot of people moving here.
So George, what do you want?
Well, I nearly didn't have an alcoholic drink because it was only about an hour or so ago I started feeling human again. But I've played it fairly safe, and I've got a very cold bottle of supermarket lager.
Ah, nice. I love the supermarket lagers. Which one have you gone for?
I've got Madry, which was all that was in the fridge. Which is
that's your favourite.
Well, they sell it.
It's what you drink every Thursday in the Beehive.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's not my favourite lager, but it's an acceptable one. It's an acceptable one.
It's the only drink other than whiskey I ever see you drink. Yeah.
You've seen me drink a fair bit of red wine as well, Chris, I think you'll find.
Not compared to Madry, but...
And I was clutching a couple of warm glasses of Prosecco last night as well.
Oh, really? You let them get warm?
Well, it was very hot in there. And what have you got, Chris?
Supermarket lager, George.
Good.
I have a Camden Hells.
Oh, well, now that is probably my favourite lager.
It's a good one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Bavarian, it says on the back. Why does it say Bavarian? Oh, Bavarian yeast, despite being brewed in Camden. Did they sell out? Have they sold out? They must. Yeah,
they did.
Bev. There you go. All of them. Oh well. It tastes all right. So yes, but I haven't had any beer this week. It's been one of those weeks where we've had all sorts of other more fancy drinks like gin and tonics and sparkling wine. So nice to finish the week with a lager.
Good. So what we like to do now, Tom, is turn to our post bag. And we begin with a segment called Whose Bird Is It Anyway? And it's where we ask our listeners to write in with their shooting quandaries and queries and dilemmas. And this episode's Whose Bird Is It Anyway submission comes from somebody who emailed pod@gunsonpegs.com, who I've decided to call Ned. And Ned has written, "Greetings from the colonies, Tasmania, Australia. A couple of years ago, I started watching TGS Outdoors on YouTube, and I loved the driven game and clay shooting videos that Johnny, friend of the podcast, produced, and this piqued my interest in the sport, which led me to discover this podcast. Living in a country with very little, if any, driven bird shooting, a quick Google search shows me my closest opportunity would be either New Zealand or one day a year on King Island. I've been living vicariously through the podcast and YouTube. I had some exposure as a young child to shooting through my grandfather. Here in Tasmania, it was ducks/kangaroos/wallabies and potentially illegal pest control of currawongs that were bothering his garden. I have no idea what a currawong is.
No, Google.
I have a few general questions regarding the culture and nuances of shooting in the UK. So he's got 6 questions. I think we'll try and tackle them all.
A currawong looks a lot like a jackdaw/crow.
Okay, Fine.
It's a corvid. Yeah.
So we're going to try and deal with all 6 of these. Some of them are questions we've kind of touched on before, so we can kind of do quite quickly. And some of them I think we can go into in a little bit more depth. So question 1, I've heard that if you ever get invited for a day of shooting, it's rude to say no. When someone invites you, does the inviter pay? From what I can gather, it's a rather expensive sport. So the second bit of that we've answered before.
Yeah, so the second bit is it depends, and be careful when answering that question in case you're unsure. Because if you say yes and then he sends you an invoice for a couple of grand, that's an error. So, is it rude to say no to an invite? Yeah.
I don't know about that. I think if you've got something else on.
Oh, right. Cool. Oh, so I'm assuming that, yeah. Okay, so if you'll say no because you don't want to, you're obviously going to make up the fact that you're otherwise engaged, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not rude to obviously be otherwise engaged. But...
This is where it's got. I think maybe it's got a bit garbled, which is it is rude to say yes to an invitation, then get another invitation that you reckon's better, and then back out so that you can go on the other one. That is rude.
That will only ever come back to bite you. This world is a small world. It will go round and you'll never get an invite again. Don't do that. Tom, anything to add? If you get invited for a day shooting, is it rude to say no?
Well, if I get invited to go shooting, I got to jump on an airplane and get over there. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, right?
Yeah. It may not be rude, but it is foolish.
Well, it kind of depends on who does the inviting, doesn't it?
It's one of these things when you're in the situation of receiving an invite, it's quite hard to recreate that feeling at other times, isn't it? It's a really cool moment when you get that letter or email or whatever it is, and it's like you can't read it fast enough. What's the last line? Where's this going?
Yeah, I've had some invites on the last year, and so of course, I'm not as familiar as you guys with the different shoots and whatnot. So I have to quickly get on the phone and call my good friend Rory Kennedy, who's the director of the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust in Scotland. Rory, do I want to go on this? And of course, the email's back. Are you stupid? Very good networking opportunity. Oh, okay. I guess I need to go on that.
Great. So this is one I think you'll probably be able to offer some advice on as well, Tom. Question 2. If someone from my part of the world ventured over there on holiday, is it possible / what would be the best way to experience shooting? Would they have to purchase the full traditional tweed getup? So as a cousin from overseas, you'll have experienced all of this. So I guess you got quite a lot of opportunity through the film, but how did you go about getting your first experience of shooting here? Was that through the film?
Yeah, it's definitely through the film, the people I've met there and stuff. But as far as the actual the clothing aspect of that question, having a set of tweeds, obviously, that goes with the traditions of what everybody else is wearing. Of course, us Americans, colonialists, I'll say, we tend to stick to something a little bit different. But that's part of the pomp and circumstance of it. It's fun to be able to get dressed up in that. And so in my film, I feature Pam Blackhall, who's a tailor there in the Highlands, and I think she handles about 30 or 40 estates and their tweeds, and just again another opportunity to showcase the fact of the money that the estates create, that economic impact, and her family's been in that business I think for about 100 years now, and so when I finished up the project, I stopped by one day and I said, "So Pam, how much would it cost for me to get a set of tweeds?" And so we negotiated a price, and I belong to an order called St. Hubertus, and we have our own tweed pattern. So we kind of get away from the aspect of a family or an estate tweed. So I was able to pick up that pattern, and supposedly this summer I'll be picking up my own set of tweeds. So kind of a cool thing, bringing it back to the film.
That's very
nice.
Cool. Yeah, really nice.
So his specific question is, would they have to purchase the full traditional tweed getup? The answer to that is no. It's whether you want to sort of get involved, embrace that, think you'll use them again. I think obviously purchasing them for one trip is probably a bit unnecessary. I've been on quite a few days over the years, though, with people from different countries where they're in their local kit.
Yes, I'm a big fan.
So Germans, awesome on a British-driven day in the full sort of German hunting regalia. That's cool. And the same with, Americans with all sorts of orange knocking around. I think it's quite nice actually to see someone in their local kit doing the same cultural thing, but in the different way over here.
Yeah. I might have told this story before about a friend of mine who came to shoot here, and he was travelling down from London but had left his breeks at the family home in Berkshire, and so was unable to find his breeks. So put on the nearest thing that he could find in his house in London, which was his lederhosen. And it was one of the bleakest days shooting I've ever been on. The rain was absolutely sideways and was sleet at times, and he was utterly miserable all day. He looked so cold. I felt very sorry for him, but it was very funny as well. So yeah, I mean, it's all about being comfortable. That's the main thing, isn't it? And some people will feel more comfortable in the stuff that they're used to wearing. Other people will feel uncomfortable if they're not dressed the same as everybody else. So it sort of comes down to what's going to make you feel comfortable on the day. And Chris, you missed a good opportunity. What's the best way of sorting out your first experience of shooting in the UK?
Oh, you really want a straightforward plug?
Yeah, go for it.
To be honest, we should test our marketing work, George, and just Google like pheasant shooting in whatever area. You'll find yourself on our website. Don't worry.
Good. Okay. Right. Question 3. How many birds does everyone take home at the end of the day? I've heard the term a brace. How many birds is that typically? And this is, I think, a little reminder for us, Chris, that we've got a lot of people who listen to this podcast who aren't necessarily game shots yet. And we've got to be careful about jargon and terminology, that every now and again just remind ourselves that not everybody knows what the hell we're talking about half the time.
Yeah. So a brace is 2. But the actual question says, how many birds does everyone take home at the end of the day? And there is no precise answer to that question. A brace is essentially the etiquette by which the keeper hands over a brace of birds that were shot on the day to the guns as a sort of gesture. The rest is usually accounted for in one way or another on all these shoots. Obviously, they plan for that. But if you went up to the keeper and said, I'd really love to take some more home, I don't think the answer, I have heard the answer being no, weirdly. But the answer is rarely ever anything other than, of course, take what you like.
Yeah. I mean, my answer to the question, how many do people typically take home, is as many as I can get in the boot of my car normally. Or as I can be bothered to carry from the chiller to my car. I take as much as I can have.
You don't want to be going too far. If you end up piling birds up after a day's shooting and you're traveling, they heat themselves up so quickly.
Yeah.
And you'll have a problem if you're going further than 20 minutes. So yeah, just be careful of that if that's your aim.
I would just add one question, though. I mean, would it be the difference between what species, though? I mean, pheasants obviously usually tend to be a higher bag limit, whereas, say, a driven grouse shoot may be a lot, but may not. But, obviously there seems to be a bigger market for, at least where I was in Scotland, for the game dealers with the grouse going off. So just curious, would it make a difference depending on what type of bird that you're actually
There's a question. So over the years, grouse have traditionally been in higher demand on the table than pheasant and partridge. That's not really the case anymore, concerningly. It might be that some particular estate has a really high price that it gets for certainly the young grouse. What you'll probably find if you don't know, and it's grouse, is you'll get palmed off with the old birds, and then they'll sell the young birds. So just be careful of that one. But again, though, if you're a paying gun, this is all relative. Like the price that they're getting for those birds, even if it's a few quid, is absolutely nothing compared to the cost that you paid for that experience. If it's driven grouse shooting or walked up grouse shooting, for that matter, so it's kind of irrelevant. So again, they're looking at it going, just take what you like.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it doesn't really vary anymore, no.
I'm actually going to do question 5 next, since we sort of slightly touched on it. Which is nicer tasting, pheasant, partridge, grouse, or woodcock?
there's about 4 episodes in their own right.
It's a bit of a kind of what's your favorite color question, isn't it? It's entirely personal.
It is a little bit. Do you want to try and answer it with a bit more detail? Actually, Tom, do you have an opinion on this? Have you tried them all?
I would preface it depends on who's doing the actual cooking, right?
It does as well.
Yeah.
So which is easier? Which is the least easiest to mess up?
Well, I think, obviously for me it would be the pheasant. That's a fairly straightforward bird, but probably the most difficult one for us would be probably the woodcock.
Yeah. Okay, so in order from least gamey to most gamey, George?
I'm going to go partridge, least gamey.
Yeah, partridge is the closest thing to chicken, I reckon. It's not like chicken at all. But if you're trying to get someone who doesn't eat game, just go with partridge every time. It's always a winner.
Yeah. Followed by pheasant.
Yep.
And then I've not eaten a lot of grouse or woodcock, but I'm going to say that grouse next, then woodcock, I think.
I'd go woodcock, then grouse.
Would you?
They're very similar, but well, they're not similar at all, but they're similar in terms
very
of their
dark meat.
Yeah. Woodcock is more consistent, I'd say, than grouse, where you've got this young old thing going on.
I mean, I've got to say, I don't really know what gamey means. That's part of the problem. I think it's
doesn't taste like chicken.
One of those words that people use to talk about game, and they go, "Oh, it's very gamey." Is it? What does that like? What does gamey taste of?
Yeah.
I can't quite put my finger on what people are trying to say. What they mean is it tastes of something, where battery house chicken doesn't.
Yeah,
but I think it's very hard to say. I think I can identify partridge and pheasant by taste quite easily, but I wouldn't be able to put my finger on exactly what the difference is or what the thing is that I'm tasting that's different.
The thing is, as Tom said at the start, they're all blooming marvelous. If the right person's cooking them in the right dish, the right recipe. I mean, yeah. I had some woodcock last year that I just forgot how good it was. I hadn't eaten it for a few years. I went through a period where I wasn't shooting them. I don't know, for a bunch of reasons. And anyway, I was like, actually, I've forgotten how much I like woodcock. I'll start shooting them again.
Yeah, over here in Montana, we do a lot of upland bird shooting, and so we do a lot of hunting for our sharp-tailed grouse. Absolutely, almost a carbon copy of your red grouse. Same kind of body, same look, just different colorations in the feathers,
right?
And the same exact cackle. I mean, absolutely exact.
Oh, really?
And very dark meat there. And so a lot of times, we'll find people that try it for the first time, and it'll have maybe not gamey, a richer flavor. And again, we've got a couple recipes that we do entertain people at our house. If you guys were to come over here and see what we have, we have a house that's very much a house that's geared towards people that are into hunting, i.e., there's lots of things hanging on the walls and on the floors and everything else. And so it's fun to have people around, but having that particular bird as a appetizer, I literally have a recipe for it where I'll marinate it a certain way for a certain amount of time, then I'll cook it out on the grill, and it's the spice that makes the difference, and it'll be the very first thing that disappears off the table during the party when it comes to appetizers.
Yeah.
And it's from people that in many cases don't eat wild game at all. So it's a lot of fun to see how you can manipulate the preparation and take it to another level.
Nice.
Yeah. So Chris, which of those four are you, if you could only have one, which would you have?
I'd probably go with partridge because it's the most versatile. A pheasant as well. Actually, maybe pheasant. A pheasant in a curry works as well as it does as a roast.
Yep.
So does partridge, though.
Yeah.
So I think the versatility of it. Whereas I've had grouse in a curry. Yeah, I'd choose one of the other two. So yeah, pheasant or partridge. Probably partridge. You?
Yeah, I think probably partridge. I mean, I just love everything about partridges. So
yeah, I agree.
I think partridge would be my choice.
Also, like quicker to do. If you're taking breasts out, just like whoosh,
yeah,
it's quite fast.
Yeah, very true. Okay, question 4, and this is where it would help if the podcast wasn't a visual medium because we're going to have to do some explaining here. I assume the beaters are close enough not to be hit by falling shot. I assume he means far enough away.
Yeah, he means far enough away. Yeah, so are they far enough away not to be hit by falling shot? So no one on a shoot day over here is far enough away to not be hit by falling shot. That's why we wear hats.
Yes, and it's. I remember the first time I was out shooting, and you kind of hear the shot rain down through the trees, don't you?
Yeah.
And you think, well, whose shot was that? And you think, well, it's probably
funny,
if I'm at
yeah.
number 1, it's probably come from number 8.
I remember the first time I remember the first time I had that as well when I was young. It was like, what the hell is that, Dad? It's quite a weird thing, isn't it?
But this is where, we talk a lot about the etiquette and the traditions and so on. And so much of the etiquette is bound up really in safety. And so safe shooting is, when you've got beaters coming towards the guns, as you do on a driven shoot, the real key thing is about, muzzle awareness and only shooting at stuff that the phrase that people use is that has sky behind it, 45 degrees kind of angle. So you're never shooting directly at the beaters. You're not shooting with a horizontal gun at any point.
So we've got to be really careful here, because we've just talked about pheasant, partridge, grouse, and woodcock. Right, pheasant and partridge, clear sky behind it all times. So that's kind of like, imagine the gun, I don't know, like 45 degrees, whatever. So the shot will travel a long way. When it drops, it doesn't hurt really. I mean, if it catches you slightly in the wrong place, it can do at times, but there's not really anything to worry about. No one ever talks about it. Grouse, on the other hand, you shoot low, clear skies out the window, you shoot into the ground often, you shoot out in front, out behind. With grouse, they blow a horn when the beaters come into what the keeper believes is this is always hilarious, the keeper believes is the distance at which they are no longer, well, they're approaching unsafe. They blow a horn. At that point on a driven grouse day, you have to shoot only behind. You cannot shoot in front, because obviously you'd end up accidentally shooting a beater. The thing is, every time I do it, and I'm like, gosh, he's feeling brave. Is he not going to blow the horn yet? They're getting closer and closer.
Yeah, but there's also usually a post, a white post out there too, from what I've seen. So when those beaters get to that post, that's a reference for you, and it's exactly what you're saying. It is a little disconcerting. I've only had a camera in my hands, but I'm standing over the shoulder of a shooter, and here come birds flying at you at Mach 2.5, and you've got this sea of humanity walking towards you.
The thing with grouse is that you're shooting obviously low down, so you haven't got this sort of 45, 90 degree thing going on like you do with pheasant and partridge. So when you have falling shot, it's falling at a pretty fast pace, and often that's why shooting over the line in grouse is just an absolute no-no. That's why you have markers, because you can drop shot from, like, let's say you're in butt 4, drop it on 8 and like do serious damage. So that's a no-no.
Okay, good. Right. So final question then. And I think this is probably the toughest. If you could only shoot one day in a season, which species would you choose to shoot and why? Tom, you go first.
Yeah, and this is your seasons wherever you want in the world. What do you do?
Well, you guys got to remember, we're not doing the driven shoot. So, I mean, for me, it's all about the dogs. We run German Wirehair pointers. So being able to watch those dogs after all the time and energy we put in training them and being out in the field and seeing, I've got one dog that's got an incredible nose and sometimes goes on point 40, 50, 60 yards from the birds. And just being able to see that makes the hunt for me everything. And that's whether, of course you want to be able to reward the dog with a good shot, so that you've got that bird on the ground. So that, and what I've done with driven shooting, I mean, I've done ducks, I've done partridge, I've done pheasant. It's all good stuff. I don't think there would be any one. It's just being able to be there with all those great people and enjoying that culture.
You've got really, to choose really one.
Good for us. Yeah. All right. I guess I'm going to say that I don't have near the experience you guys have, so I'm just going to stick to. I just have my experience out at Muck has been unparalleled on anything else I've done, just because of the environment, the ocean, the waves, all the different animals that are out there, the seal rookeries, and seeing all the other incredible things, all the raptors that are out there. So it's a lot of fun to be out there.
The problem is Muck's great. One of the reasons it's great is because of the multiple bird species that they have. You can end up shooting woodcock, snipe, wild duck, wild geese, pheasant, partridge. I think that's basically all that you end up with. but you can only pick one of those. That was his question. So
Yeah, well, I've only been there in September, and so they don't have the pheasant open yet. So you have to sit there and pick your birds because the pheasants at that point in time don't quite have the long tail feathers. So there's a little bit of a skill involved in identifying your target before you start, letting go. But the partridge shooting driven partridge shooting, it's pretty exceptional.
Lovely. George, I think you're going to copy, aren't you?
Well, I was thinking about this. This coming season, if I was only allowed one day, it would be grey partridge. And partly that's because I've never actually had the chance to shoot them. And consequently, if I was only going to have one opportunity, I'd make it a special one. But also because really ever since George Ponsonby came on the podcast a little while ago, I've become increasingly obsessed with grey partridges, and visiting the Duke of Norfolk place the other week, Tarquin's book. Yeah, I've become increasingly obsessed with grey partridges, and it's sort of creeping up the bucket list to, if it wasn't already number one, it's pretty firmly in the number one slot now. So that would be my choice.
That is a great choice. The thing about grey partridge, and the thing about the people you just mentioned, is it's not so much about the shooting, i.e. the sort of the bird species of the shooting itself. It's what it takes and the enjoyment and everything else that it takes to actually lay on that day. That's what makes that so amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, well, and the fact that they are, a native game bird species, and very much kind of part of, when you think about the old partridge shoots, a lot of them were around here where we live. So I feel like I have an affinity with them in that regard as well.
Cool, it's a great question.
Come on then, Chris.
I mean, on the basis you've chosen grey partridge, because that is a great shout, I'm going to go grouse in the driven form, because I think when you're in that situation, it just doesn't get much better for exhilaration.
Well, when I come back from my trip in August, I shall see if I agree with you.
Are you going to share to pod listeners what happened?
I think we did already. Did we?
You? Oh,
yeah, I think so. Well, if we didn't,
so jammy.
Well, if we didn't,
I don't think you did. Just from my point of view, exactly. Go.
Yeah, previous podcast guests Sean and Liz Delaney very kindly invited me to go and join them on a day at the end of August, having heard me say on the pod that I'd never shot grouse before. And the highly enjoyable bit about the invitation was that it was suggested that Chris might like to come and be my loader, but unaccountably Chris is busy that day.
If I wasn't actually busy, I'd still be busy, yes. I'm at Lord's for the cricket, George, as you know. So we're both having a lovely time that day.
Yeah. Right.
Very good. That's a cracking bit of correspondence. I'm glad it was fun doing that.
Yeah, very
Thanks,
good.
Ned. So, great drive names. This one comes from someone that we shall call Frankie. He says, I was listening to a recent podcast, and at the end of it, I heard George suggest topics to write in about including how a drive got its name. Well, this isn't quite that. This is more I hope this has nothing to do with how the drive got its name bit of correspondence. I've been shooting with a great buddy of mine for the best part of 40 years, and we've done everything from grand driven days, stags in Scotland, and simple armed walks in the hope of a pigeon or a rabbit. He runs an awesome pheasant shoot in Wiltshire, which in the past I've been a member of, but as I've moved away, it's no longer the case. However, I'm still lucky enough to get invited to shoot from time to time. He has some stunning drives that can rival almost anything in Devon, but this isn't about one of those drives. This is about a drive that can nevertheless be excellent, formed of a hanging on one side of a valley with a meadow below crossing to a small river, then on the other side, a steeply banked wood. When the birds come out, they can be marvellous when they're heading for the top of the wood on the opposite side. However, in the middle of the drive, there is a rough track that actually leads off a small leafy lane, and late at night, this can be frequented by amorous couples looking for what we should call a little privacy and them time. Over the years, the farmer has come across many items of apparel on this lane, all discarded in haste and not retrieved after them time has concluded, but none better than a pair of hot pink patent leather stiletto shoes. He actually decided these should become a more permanent feature of the drive, so nailed them to the base of a tree on the side of the track. For all I know, they are still there today, although when last seen, they were losing much of their luster. Anyway, getting to the point of this note, this is the drive that I hope to does not derive its name from the alternative use the drive gets from time to time. The name of that drive, Backpath.
Oh, God.
The
That's
keepers had
very,
some fun,
very
hasn't
good. The nailing the shoes up. You know how all the old keepers used to hang the foxes and magpies and what have you that they'd killed from the
Moles
moles
off
and
the
what have you.
off the fence.
Off the fence. It's sort of got echoes of that, hasn't it? I really like that though. More of those, please. I really enjoy them.
Yeah, that was funny. They've had some good ones.
Right, so Ned, Frankie, and now you, Tom, are the newest members of the Most Noble Order of the Garters, and will soon be in receipt of a set of the much coveted Guns on Pegs podcast shooting stock garters. If you two have a quandary or a query that you would like us and our guests to help you with, or an unpopular opinion, or you'd like to tell us about a drive with a particularly good name and you would like a set of garters, drop us an email to pod@gunsonpegs.com. So, Tom, you told us a little bit about the film at the beginning, but just for the benefit of the listeners, obviously Chris and I have had the opportunity to see it now, for which we thank you. But can you just give people a little bit of an overview about what the film is all about?
Oh, that's a loaded question. The film's called The Last Keeper, and a lot of people ask me, like, well, why in the world did you come up to Scotland to make a film about people in the Highlands? And so I'd heard some rumors some years ago. We were working on a film in Africa called Killing the Shepherd. It was about a indigenous rural community in Africa, a very remote part of the area that was led by a woman chief who wanted to break the bonds of poverty by waging war against wildlife poaching. The wildlife there is a natural resources that provides for their most basic human rights, a good paying job, an opportunity to get access to healthcare, and their kids to get an education. And a lot of people don't realize that. And as I was working on that project, I started to have a couple of guys in the sporting side of things, the hunting side of things in the UK, tell me about this crazy stories over conflict around the sporting estates in the Highlands in Scotland. And so we started doing a little bit of research on it. And while I was down in Zambia, I met a guy named John Shield, who is on the board of, I think he's a trustee for the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust. And John ended up introducing me to a guy named Rory Kennedy, who is the director for GWCT in Scotland. And so Rory and I started talking, and he filled me in with kind of like the overview of what's going on up there over the conflict over land ownership and land use. And it was fascinating. And being an American with let's face it, guys, I have a lot of dead relatives, dead great grandfathers and grandmothers buried on your island. We've been able to actually trace my lineage back to the Book of Doom, and so I've got a lot of steeped history there on the island. And so it was real fascinating to hear hear the stories of what were going on. And so Rory and I did a lot of research, talked to a lot of different people. And then a photographer and I from Montana, a guy named Tony Bynum, who's a enrolled tribal member. He worked, he's got a master's in land management, phenomenal photographer, actually worked at in Washington, D.C., directly respond to working with the head of the Environmental Protection Agency in DC on Native American issues when it comes to the environment. So I got Tony to come with me, and we came over for about almost 2 weeks back in May of 2022, and we wanted to kind of see what was going on. And Rory took us around, and we met a lot of different people, from all over the place. Not just people sporting estates, but people that are in the economic sides of things. We met with JP Dashler, who has Dixon and Sons up there, and Dunkeld. We met with a lot of different other folks. Got a chance to meet Peter Fraser. I'm sure you guys obviously know who he is, just fascinating the stories that were going on. But the more we dug into it, just the crazier that things sounded. And so the story really is about those people that are in charge and taking care of the wildlife conservation in Scotland in the Highlands, and those are the keepers, the gillies, and the stalkers. They're the ones that are doing conservation work. And what we try to educate people, especially our target audience is the 60, 70, 80% of the people in the middle that don't really care one way or another about, say, shooting or hunting, especially in the United States. Our target audience, as long as it's done for the right reasons, with people, when it comes to hunting, they want to be able to see that people are utilizing the game for consumption. The reality there is, is that it's urban people that we're trying to reach that don't really understand what goes on in the countryside. And so we jumped into this project and heard all kinds of crazy stories. We really came to realize that conservation is a wise use of a natural resource. Here in the United States, Gifford Pinchot coined that phrase back turn of the century, 1900. And we have this modern, what I call modern conservation ethos here that we've been practicing for, probably 120, 30 years now, where the wildlife provides a value to people. And because it provides a value, we take care of it. And we're very blessed to have large amounts of land to work with, big landscapes, and we've done a pretty good job. And of course, our history, we go back, 1600s. My family was here in the 1620s, and my relatives helped colonize what is now New England. And I can tell you, my relatives and a lot of other people's relatives mucked up this place in the 16, 17, and 1800s. We didn't realize that these resources, these natural resources, the forest and the wildlife, were finite resources. They're not infinite. And so we utilized them to the point where we almost, exhausted them, and all in the name of quote unquote progress for our country. But wiser heads prevailed in the late 1800s, guys like George Bird Grinnell, Theodore Roosevelt, president of the United States, and they ushered in this modern conservation ethos. And so we've done a pretty good job, you could almost say, of rewilding the United States. A lot of commonality there, a lot of common themes, a little bit different than what we're seeing in Scotland and other parts of Europe. But the reality there is that we spent a lot of time on the ground. And then the goal there was to create a film that's very balanced about what are the issues on the ground, who are the people that are pushing agendas, and why are they pushing those things. So the film actually incorporates not only the keepers and their story. Of course, it's called The Last Keeper, and the fact that we've come to realize that being a keeper isn't necessarily a positive thing anymore, which is unfortunate because of the long history and traditions. Keepers have historically always been important people in their communities. They're people that get things done, people you can trust, people that will have your back and your family if there's a problem. And unfortunately, because of this disconnect we see in the urban world, and you have this tendency to, and we see it online, we see it in person, that when you talk about keepers and shooting estates, that people immediately get their hackles up. The urban population wants to sit there and degrade these people, ostracize them. Their children are ostracized in school. And in some cases, we had one person tell us that they had a keeper that his children had been threatened with having acid thrown in their face because they were just the children of keepers. So, there's some societal issues there, obviously. But really what it comes down to is how are we going to leave the planet? Are we going to leave it better than we found it? And that's really what our whole push through the Shepherds of Wildlife Society. We're made up of wildlife photographers and outdoor filmmakers. We see what's going on in nature. We see what man's impact is on nature. And it's not positive in a lot of places. And so the reality there is that we see a huge disconnect in that urban world when it comes to our wildlife and wildlife habitat. And let's face it, conservation work that goes on in Scotland, the muir burn is a form of conservation. It's enhancing what wildlife habitat we have in order to make it better for what wildlife is left. We do this all across North America. In the United States, especially for our wild quail, we do low intensity burning and the suppression of ground predators. Sound familiar? Here in the United States, our governments, state governments, federal governments give landowners rewards and awards for those types of things, that type of action in conservation. Where what I discovered over in Scotland was, this angst towards ownership of land, and almost to the point where I think they'd want to hang them from the highest tree. And interesting enough, when I first started the project, I thought that Scotland didn't have a single tree on it, and there were red deer everywhere. When I got there, I realized it was completely the opposite. There's some deer, not near as many deer as I expected. I've driven 4,000 or 5,000 miles across the Highlands. I've probably seen more of the Highlands than most Scots have. And, you just don't see the type of wildlife that we see right here in my own backyard in Montana. And we don't have, huge numbers of wildlife. They're all proportionate to what we have. But, I can drive down, 3/4 of a mile from my house to my mailbox, and I'll any morning or evening to get the mail or get the newspaper, and I'll see 6, 8, 10, 12 white-tailed deer. Sometimes I might see an elk. We see hawks and raptors flying in the air, tons of wild turkey around here. Yet the 4,000 or 5,000 miles I drove around Scotland, you just didn't see anywhere near the proportionate number of deer. I'm not talking red deer here, driving around through the Highlands. And of course, all of the glens are full of trees. And I'm not even talking about the stuff that's actually been planted, via, schemes, government schemes coming out of World War I, World War II, or even the stuff that happened in the 80s and 90s where the government was subsidizing the planting of Sitka spruce, Douglas fir, and larch, in that upper Highland country in order to create a timber industry, which, down southern Scotland, down around Galloway, there's nothing but it's a sea of trees in many places of these man-made, forest of non-native trees, which, we could get into all that too. So yeah, it was real fascinating to see what's going on there. And so really the story is about these keepers, the relationship with the land, and, whether or not they're going to realize their most basic human rights, a good paying job, having a house, their kids have an opportunity to live in a community where there's schools and all that stuff, because that's really what it comes down to. Because it's not the people living in Edinburgh or Glasgow that are doing the conservation work. It's those keepers that are doing the work.
Yeah, it's kind of, if there's like an overarching theme, I suppose you could say it's about the kind of the conflict between sort of traditional land management practices and more modern takes on what land management and conservation looks like, and particularly with regard, I think, to carbon capture, carbon sequestration, tree planting on big estates being bought up by businesses to plant trees for carbon credits, that kind of thing. It's about that. It's a lot of it, at any rate, it's about that conflict, isn't it?
Yeah, George, it's a super complex deal that's going on there, and yeah, you're hitting the nail on the head, Enzo. But I think it's so nuanced what's going on, because really what I saw that, at the end of the day, we have to make decisions, managing the land with 8 billion humans on the planet. Wildlife doesn't live in cities. It doesn't live on top of mountains here in Montana, because most of the year they're covered in snow and ice. They live on those fertile ground. They're living on farmland. They're living on ranch land. They're living on estates where they have the environment, a good habitat to live in, a healthy habitat. And I think that, we're in a scenario now where you've got these people that, because of the historical grievances, I mean, let's face it, you take any Scot, you go back far enough in their lineage, you're going to find the oppressed or the oppressor. And there's a lot of baggage. I mean, the problem here in Scotland isn't one about science, because at the end of the day, we have to have some sort of foundation to make decisions when it comes to wildlife and habitat conservation or the management of the land. And as I said, with so many people on the planet, wildlife habitat's shrinking. And in the case of Scotland, it's shrinking because we're making human value judgments to plant trees. And in some cases, as you alluded to with the carbon sequestration schemes, which, we found talking to scientists that if you plant these trees, any kind of tree up in these upper moorland, this heather moorland, I mean, that's your wild wilderness of Scotland. That has evolved over thousands of years. And when you plant trees, now here in the United States, when I go out, and I've planted tens of thousands of bare rootstock trees, and we use a dibble bar. It's a steel bar. You stick it in the ground, you push it off to one side, you take out your bare rootstock, you stick it in the ground, you tamp it around with your foot so it's sitting straight up and down, and then you move on to the next one, you plant the next tree. Well, in the Highlands, where you have this evolved heather moorland, which according to the 92 treaty, Rio Treaty on Biodiversity, is considered an ecosystem of importance, and I read that as concern. There's not a lot of it around the world. They're planting trees with 45-ton tracos. Because there's an iron hardpan that's developed on that land over thousands and thousands of years. And so it's a real disconcerting to me, as someone who believes in making sure we leave the place better than we found it, to see people utilizing heavy equipment to break through that hardpan to plant a tree that Mother Nature never intended it to be there. And of course, you have these opposing sides. You have the sporting estate sides and the keepers that are doing their conservation work. And then you have, I'll almost say this kind of urban elite type rewilder with these organizations, these NGOs that they have, where, at the end of the day, you have to raise money to keep your nonprofit up and running, or your charity. And of course, I've come to really come home to me over this project, and I see it all over the world. None of these entities can exist unless they can raise money. Well, you don't raise money unless you got to have a conflict. You have to have a crisis. And then you can go ask your donors for money. Hey, we need to recreate something that supposedly existed tens of thousands of years ago or thousands of years ago in Scotland. So let's go ask everybody and their brother for some money. And of course, the whole idea behind rewilding, and I've had to correct quite a few of your journalists in your country, they like to call the John Muir Trust, Trees for Life, groups like them, conservation organizations. Guys, I mean, go look it up in the dictionary. I mean, they're completely the opposite. There is no wise use of the land. They actually push the let Mother Nature be free. No management of the land by humans. Obviously, no muir burn. Managing the deer herd, so it's on there. And of course, when I sit there and ask these guys, how is nature free? When you planted a tree, you put in a deer fence, or you cull the deer to the point where they're no longer in existence on the landscape. That's just another human value chain. It's another form of management. That's all it is. So you've got a group of people that are just saying, hey, we're going to manage the land because we want it this way. And quite often, I think it has nothing to do with what the outcomes will be. It has to do with, as far as science and the nature and the conservation of the land, it has to do with the fact that these people just don't like landowners. I mean, real simple.
And your tone there is fascinating because obviously that's kind of the way we think too. But you mentioned that you came about this project because of Rory Kennedy at GWCT when you chatted to him. But did you go into it with a totally open mind as to what the scenario could be and where the film might go? Or did you have a preconceived idea because of the conversations you'd had?
Well, I think that the early conversations helped spur my interest, but I approach all of my projects not only as a filmmaker but as an investigative journalist. And I'm the son of a serious journalist. I've been around it my whole life. I'm a journalist myself, and so if we really want to create a film that is impactful, my goal is to educate and inspire my viewer. And so it's really imperative that we don't get too one-sided, if you know what I mean. You get lopsided or you're pushing one side over another. And let's face it, I mean, there's incredible films produced by the rewilding side. There's great films produced by people in the sporting estate or shooting side or hunting side. But what it looks like and what it really is just propaganda. And so it's really hard to get over those barriers, to get that broader public who is our audience, our target audience, to sit there and listen. Because if I come across and beat somebody on the head and say, hey, you guys, you're stupid, you don't understand, this is how this works, it doesn't work. It's not effective. The key there is to use people's stories, let them tell their own story, give them a voice. And in many cases, what I witnessed in Scotland is that the voices of the keepers, those people in the countryside, all of them, the farmers, everyone, their voices are being drowned out by the urban rewilders because they have big platforms and they have large numbers of people. And especially when it comes to the politics, when it comes to what's going on in Scotland, I see the politicization of wildlife and habitat conservation being done in a way that they can use it as a cudgel to beat over landowners. Hence, we've got this licensing scheme of grouse moors, muir burn, banning the different types of management on the land, from trapping and snaring and so forth. And it's to make it so difficult that people just give up. And let's face it, guys, we all know this, and your viewers know this, I'm sure, and you guys do. But these landowners, they're subsidizing these lands. They're managing them out of their own pocket because they love them. And we do the same thing here in the United States. You find me a rancher here that's got a big cattle spread that is also an elk hunter and tell me that he isn't putting some of his own money from some other part of his, whatever his portfolio is, in order to manage that land for the benefit of the wildlife that he garners a benefit from because he enjoys utilizing it and being a part of it. And it's no different, in what I saw in Scotland. And even the rewilding estates, those rewilding estates, they're not self-sufficient. I mean, the largest landowner in the country, Anders Poulsen, I think was 150, 200,000 acres there. And last year, his tax return came out. I think he lost 9 million pounds running his rewilded estate. So, the question at the end of the day for me was, okay, are we going to leave the planet better than we found it? Are the people that actually do the conservation work going to receive a benefit? In the case of the keepers, it's having a job, having a home, a place for their kids to go to school, that kind of thing. Because really at the end of the day, what I came to realize is that, even the people who live in the cities, the people that are pushing rewilding, they all kind of want the same. They all want the same thing. They want to have a healthy planet, healthy ecosystems. We all want clean drinking water. And I think that when you're actively involved on the ground, you have a tendency to push for those things. And so I think, we kind of got to get over this historical grievances, the baggage that's out there. And it's tough. I mean, these people, there's been a lot of conflict in Scotland for a long time. And I don't really see it changing unless you can get some wiser heads and get some adults in the room. But and it's also looking at how other people do things. We're not perfect over here and over in in America, but we've done a pretty good job of rewilding our country. We do a lot of it. It's all based on science, peer-reviewed science.
I wanted to ask you about the parallels with the States, because one of the bits of it, I don't want to give too many spoilers away, but one of the bits I thought was really interesting is when you are speaking to David Bow-Harry, who's the chief exec of the John Muir Trust, specifically about the Assynt controversy about their deer cull there, and you're really pressing him on, well, how many deer were there, and how many did you shoot, and how did you know how many there were? How did you decide how many you needed to shoot? And he was, I think, quite evasive about that, but it got me immediately thinking about the US model, where, and you'll tell me if I'm wrong, I think that the government or the Department for Fish and Wildlife or whoever, they kind of carry out population studies on what's around, and that's how they decide how many tags are issued. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is correct. And we have some pretty incredible infrastructure, as far as the government goes. We have at the state level, we have a state fish and game agency. All 50 states have that. And we have some incredible funding apparatuses. We have a thing that it's called the Pittman-Robertson Act that was established in 1937. And basically it's a federal excise tax on all guns and ammunition and archery tackle that's charged at the wholesale level, not at the retail level. So you don't see it at the cash register. But that amount goes to all 50 states fish and game agencies to pay for the conservation of the land, pays for the science. It pays for the wildlife biologists to do those surveys, to look at the land, to look at the wildlife and all that. It also pays for the protection of the resource, your game wardens, your conservation officers. And last year, the last time I saw data, that fund collected $1.4 billion. So we have a pretty good system in play. And the reason why I bring it up is that there really isn't a system anything like that in Scotland or in the United Kingdom. Right. And so and it's one of those things, even looking at keepers, I said, wow, you guys fill in a really important role here because you're out in the field. You have this incredible institutional knowledge. And if we don't want to lay too much out there, but you guys had a huge forest fire, the largest one ever in the history of the United Kingdom last June. And it was kind of ground zero for the chairman for Trees for Life on his property. And without the help of gamekeepers, with their institutional knowledge and the very specialized equipment they have to do muir burn, that fire would have destroyed that guy's home and many more tens of thousands of acres of rewilded land, because there's more on rewilded land. You can't face. The reality is you have more fuel on the landscape, and so when we have any kind of period of drought or whatever, wildfire is a real thing.
Well, that was another bit of the film that I wanted to raise with you, because I thought it was very interesting to see somebody who is the chairman of a rewilding organization, Trees for Life, saying boldly, "We are, with what we're doing, at greater risk of wildfire, and we will have more. And without the gamekeepers, this could have been so much worse." Does that give you a little bit of hope that perhaps some of these organizations are starting to see that, yes, that what they have in their head, their beautiful picture about where this all might go, has kind of crashed into reality a bit, and that some of them are starting to go, okay, maybe the ideal that we were trying to aim for is a noble and good thing, but isn't actually a real world thing? Did you get that sense from any of the others that you were speaking to?
Or does it not fit their narrative, so they're going to dismiss it and the fact that it ever happened?
Yeah, and that's the thing too. Again, what I said earlier, you can't have one of these organizations without having money, right, guys? You got to pay salaries, you got to pay for your mission, and so there's a constant push to raise money all the time. So you do get some blowback. In the case though, Trees for Life, you're talking about Nigel Fraser, the chairman. Nigel's a saint. I mean, a guy to stand up like that. He's gotten quite a bit of grief We've got quite a bit of earned media that's been produced coming from your mainstream media there in your country about the film. He's been highlighted in some articles about the issue with forest fires and fire protection in your country. I think there are people like him that could be the leaders to help bridge the gap there. And there is some efforts. There's this common ground group that's been meeting for a couple of years, and they're having the Balharis and the Peter Frasers all, and then Scott McKenzie's all in the same room trying to find some common ground. But it's almost like I think they need to have a third party, arbitrator come in and say, hey guys, okay, at the end of the day, this is what the end results are. Okay, the only way you're going to get there is to do X, Y, and Z. The rest of this shit, throw it out with the bathwater. I mean, it doesn't work. And I think part of the problem too I see is that you don't see as much reliance on the rewilding side on science, peer-reviewed science. Now they'll discredit any science that comes from, say, Game Wildlife Conservation Trust. But again, we're talking about peer-reviewed science. In the case of David Balhari, it's not in the film, but it is on our podcast. So all of these characters in the film, we take their entire interviews and they're on our shepherdsofwildlife.org website as a full hour, 2 hour, 3 hours long podcast. So you're able to hear all of the conversation. And in the case of, say, grouse moor management, I asked David, I said, well, first of all, he made the statement on camera on our second or third interview, grouse moor management's done to the detriment of the land on the animals that live on it. And I said, okay. And while the camera's rolling, I just said, exactly how is it a detriment, and to exactly what species of animals is it a detriment to? And he says, well, Tom, it's the woodland animals. And I'm like, no, David, you just said it was a detriment to the land and the animals that live on it. So exactly what species? I asked him 4 times, and you listen to this on the podcast. He can't give me an answer because it's nothing but political spin. It's just a way that they can go out there and differentiate the fact that, hey, what is going on? The management, the conservation of the land on grouse moors is being done in a way that we don't approve of. That's all it is. It has nothing to do with science.
It's so infuriating. And then when they're talking about the idea that, well, if we actually rewilded all these places, we're going to get more people, there'll be more jobs, all this sort of stuff. He absolutely believes that argument. And I cannot believe that he believes it. I mean, I understand if you have one rewilded estate and it is behind a big charity with let's say 1 million followers, you can increase, in interest in that particular estate by marketing the hell out of it. If you did that across the whole country, you're not getting any more people up there. You're just spreading the people that you had on that one estate across all of them. And guess what? That's much worse off than it is currently. And the idea that he thinks that's not the case, honestly, you need to bang his head against the wall just to make him see sense, because it's absolutely balmy.
But I mean, this also makes me think of we've been having a lot of conversations one way and another, on Scribehound, on the podcast, at the Moreland Matters event, about how these conversations take place in the public sphere, about the types of conversations and the way that we talk about these things in the media, who does the talking, all that kind of stuff. So it feels to me like this film's come at a pretty timely moment, but maybe it's just coincidence.
Yeah, no, it's. I think it's almost, you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, you've got this conflict going on. You finally have the folks in the rural areas of the country that have a voice. I think, we did the screening, the premiere in Edinburgh. We had a couple of government ministers. We also had the CEO of Nature Scott in attendance. And these films, I mean, that's what it's meant to do. It's meant to educate people. It's meant to get our leaders, our decision makers, whether they be politicians, whether they be mainstream media, and other people in our communities, to just say, hey, wait a minute here. There's a story here that maybe you don't fully understand. And, this is how conservation works. This is why you have, like here in the United States, there's a reason why we have birds in the bird feeder, why we have deer and turkey in the backyards, why we have, these incredible national forests. And in this country, it's because of hunters who went hunting. And in your country, when it comes to this incredible land you have out there, I love the idea of having natural places. I think wilderness is a wonderful thing. I don't think we need to be planting chalets and lodges on the tops of all these estates, which, in talking with David Balhari, his plan was to have all the Anders Poulsons of the world come there and buy up all the land because they had the money, literally said they had the money to build the infrastructure for tourism. But as you said, George, there is no economic model here where people are staying in those communities. They're spending money in those communities. Like Scott McKenzie talks about the Isle of Skye, and it's a steady stream of buses, full of people that are coming up from Glasgow and Edinburgh. They're driving around for a day, jumping off at this place and that place to take their selfie and for IG, for Instagram. And then they're jumping back on the bus. And yeah, maybe they might stop and eat someplace. Maybe they'll have one night there, but these people are not living in these communities. And so since they're not living in there, you're literally tearing the fabric out of these communities when these estates get sold off into rewilding. And, now I know there are estates like Mara Lodge, Glenfeshie and things like that, where they are hiring a fair number of people. But you also have to understand the types of jobs that I'm seeing, especially when it comes to the timber side of things. Once you plant that tree and build that deer fence, which I have to tell you guys, I wish 20 years ago I would have known how much deer fence your country was going to build, because I would have invested in a deer fence company and I'd be a gazillionaire right now. But the reality there is that the money is not being generated and staying there. And maybe that might change some way. But I think, for instance, the monarch of the Glen, the red stag, every tourist that goes up to Ascent, like you were talking about earlier, where Coonag Estate, John Muir's estate is, and where this battle is going on over deer management between them and the crofters, which is the very first community buyout in the country's history. And David actually says that they're not a community buyout; they're just a bunch of little landowners. I was just like, what's the story?
Yeah,
here,
I remember that bit and remember thinking, well, what's the difference between a bunch of people who live somewhere and own the land on which they live and a community? It's so weird.
Baffling to me. So, but yeah, I think at the end of the day, though, I think everybody wants the same end result. If we could just weed out some of the bad actors that have agendas and try to figure out guys like Nigel Fraser, Trees for Life. I mean, he's a guy that could lead this effort. And I think a lot of the keepers are the same way. Now, there are keepers out there that absolutely will not, they're just not going to begrudge. And I also think that keepers need to start thinking outside their box or thinking differently about what they do, because, they're really important as far as their institutional knowledge and the things that they do. And they're much more than keepers. They're in charge of so many things. And, it's almost like because you don't have a government apparatus to kind of really do the stuff. I mean, yeah, there's some entities out there, but there's nobody really like we have of a conservation officer that it'd be interesting to see explore the opportunities to try to get some of these guys maybe licensed or educated to be some, because they really are the spokespeople, the ambassadors, especially with the right to roam, which that's another whole story by itself. But the reality there is you have so many people on the landscape, and having those guys and people looking up to them, knowing that they would take care of their safety, that they're out there watching the wildlife. They're able to help people as guides and nature guides. And then also being able to explain how conservation truly works, and the fact that everything on nature, everything is programmed to overpopulate the carrying capacity of the land. And and the fact that we have less and less wildlife habitat, what we have, we need to enhance so it's the best, highest quality for the wildlife, healthy as it can be. And then at the same time, there's going to be an excess population of game animals, which we've historically used as humans for forever, as long as we've walked on 2 feet. So, and I think I think that will resonate even with the rural folks, because the urban folks, because, at the end of the day, I like to say there's a reason why a campfire mesmerizes every human being in the world. And it has nothing, and I mean nothing to do with roasting marshmallows. And so, I think there is some great opportunities there, and I really hope and pray that these guys all find some common ground and really work together for it. But again, I think they're going to need some outside help.
So this is going to certainly have whet people's appetite. How are they going to be able to see this?
Well, we've been involved. Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust has been helping us with a screening tour around the United Kingdom. So we've already shown it, I think, in about 10 or 12 locations. So if you haven't seen it, go to their website for Scotland. You can look to see what other areas are going to be having screenings, and buy your tickets online. And then we're also going to be doing the same thing here in the United States with screenings around the country. And then June 29th, we're going to launch a digital cinema event that'll make it available through shepherdsofwildlife.org. And you'll be able to watch the film along with the 30-minute panel discussion that we filmed after the world premiere in Edinburgh. We had a couple of gals and a guy there, and their names escape me off the top of my head, but they're kind of pseudo celebrities. And they were able to kind of give their first impressions on the film and talk to me and ask me questions. So it's kind of a special treat. And And so basically for 30 days, folks will be able to go to shepherdsofwildlife.org and be able to access the film. And then after that, it'll roll out onto various online streaming platforms. My last film, Killing the Shepherds, available on Apple TV, Tubi, Amazon Prime, Curiosity Stream, YouTube, all those different platforms. So over the course of the rest of the year, and then and I do know that there are some theaters that we did screenings with in Scotland that specifically asked to do a regular run of the film, just like any mainstream Hollywood film. And so I know in Fort William, I think Inverness, Aberfeldy, I think those theaters have asked for to have the film to run throughout the rest of the summer. So, keep your eyes peeled on social media. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Shepherds of Wildlife Society, or me, Tom Opre, OPRE, and people will see updates on that. And then the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust has their website.
I'll make sure I put all the links in the show notes so people will be able to just find it from their podcast apps.
So, Tom, the way that we finish these podcasts off touches on something we've almost gone to earlier on in the pod. But the scenario is this: the extinction level event asteroid is going to hit tomorrow. But your affairs are in order, your loved ones and enemies are reconciled, your dogs are fed, and your tomatoes are watered. So your last day out begins how?
Well, and it has to be around some sort of form of hunting or shooting too, correct, right?
Fishing is also permitted.
Yeah. Well, I just got back from the Bahamas fishing for bonefish, so I've already checked that one off this year. Honestly, guys, there is a bird hunt that I'd love to do. It's not a driven shoot per se. I just have never had the opportunity to do it, and it's on the Big Island of Hawaii. It's the hunting for they've brought in wild turkeys, the Rio subspecies. And the way they hunt them there, typically the way you hunt turkeys, you hunt them in the spring during their mating season, and you use decoys and calls, and you're trying to coerce the big gobbler into coming in. So there's a lot of strategy involved and skill. They also have that, but they have so many turkeys on the ground. And this is at the Parker Ranch, which is about a 60,000 acre ranch in the middle of the Big Island, Hawaii. And the way they hunt them is with bird dogs, like a walk-up shoot, and they actually shoot them on the wing.
Wow.
And I find that just so unique and different. Here's this 15, 20 pound bird lifting off a point, and it's a wing shooting opportunity. So I guess a little bit different, not the typical thing you guys would probably hear, but pretty fascinating.
That's the point of this.
Yeah. That's the coolest one so far, I reckon. I mean, I say that often, but that's really cool. Really cool.
Nice. Yeah. Adventurous. No one's been there before, so epic. Any particular team you're going with?
Well, obviously my wonderful wife will have to come with me because she does just as much of hunting as I do, if not more. And let's face it, guys, I'll have to tell you, she's been more successful in the field than I have. She's a better shot than I am, and she's sure as heck a whole lot better on the eyes than I am. So
we'll have to leave it there then.
Great. Well, Tom, it's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you ever so much for coming on and for getting up early to come on as well. Very, very much appreciated.
Yeah, and huge well done with the film, and good luck with getting it out there to everyone.
Yeah, no, and hey, guys, I appreciate it. Appreciate your listeners for supporting you guys to give us this opportunity, and your sponsors, so that we can get the word out about what's so important when it comes to wildlife and habitat conservation, and making sure that we're all fighting to make sure we leave the plant better than we found it.
Hear, hear.
Good man.
Right, so before we go, all that remains for me to say is that there is a final reminder that you can get your hands on a pair of the very exclusive Guns on Pegs podcast shooting sock garters by sending us your shooting dilemmas for us to resolve, or by sending us your unpopular opinions, or sharing a forgotten drive, or a drive with a great name with a good story behind it. Drop us an email to pod@gunsonpegs.com, and if we read it out in any future episode, we will send you some garters. We will be back in a couple of weeks' time with another episode and another special guest. But until then, thanks very much for listening, and goodbye.